Hey, hello. This is actually a video I've already done before, but I'm going to redo it because I got a few more details I want to have in this. And if you don't know what we're talking about the U.S. Constitution, the U.S. Constitution being our former government, the United States, and considered to be the supreme law of the land. Everything else that we talk about in terms of legal stuff, local level, state level, county level, even federal level, it all is subservient to the U.S. Constitution. So let's start. We're going to build a graphic organizer and we're going to make something beautiful today. Let's start by folding our paper and we're going to go hamburger style. Oops, that's not very good, was it? And then I'm going to go ahead and do it again. And then I'm going to go ahead and fold it again like this, flip it up, and then one more time. Now I got a perfect little box. And once again, it's not perfect, but this doesn't have to be perfect. It's just to help us to better space our information. And these notes not only going to be give you details about different branches of government, but it's really designed to help you better understand. Um, and I want to do something here. There we go. It's going to help you better understand the relationship between some different concepts. So here we go. We're going to start with a term. We're going to start right in the middle. Look at the bottom of your paper and just go straight up the middle line, right up to the next two boxes. And right in the center of those two boxes, we're going to write this term. U.S. Constitution. That is what we're talking about today. And because it's an important term, I'm going to go ahead and put it in a little kapow box because that's how I identify things in my notes that are really important that I have to remember. And when you think about the U.S. Constitution, I want you to think about it's the supreme law of the land. It is the top dog. Supreme law of the land. Okay. And because I want you to think about that, I always put these in like a think aloud cloud. Because when you look at U.S. Constitution, you should be thinking about this term. Now, because I want to make sure we put some color on this beautiful, beautiful picture, I'm going to take that kapow box, the Constitution. I'm going to add a little yellow to it. Don't get crazy, just get it in there. Because I want this to stand off on your page. Because if it does, you'll understand how important this terminology is. Now, we're going to add a bunch of words on here. Then we're going to put it all together in a way that makes a lot of sense to you. But let's start down here at the very bottom. Look at these two boxes here. I'm going to put four words. These are four vocab words. They're going to go in kapow boxes too. And these four words are really important because they are really the foundation of the U.S. Constitution. The Constitution is based on these four concepts. And if you haven't talked about these, if you don't know what these are, there's another video you can watch that'll help you understand these better. So let's talk about these. For starters, compromise. Specifically, when we talk about the Constitution historically, the Great Compromise, the Three-Fifths Compromise, compromises on what the presidency would look like, compromises on all kinds of different things. Compromise, compromise, compromise. We don't have enough of that in our government nowadays, but when you compromise something, you give a little bit to get a little bit. And you may not get everything that you want, but if you can get part of what you want, you're willing to give up some other things that people really think are important to them. So this is an important concept, and it's a driving concept behind our Constitution. And a lot of the laws that are made today are still based on compromise. Now, another term I think is really important. We're going to add that down here. It's called federalism. Now, if you don't remember this from other conversations or from other things you've learned, federalism is the idea that There's shared power between different levels of government. So you have certain things that are done on the local level. There are certain things on the state level, certain things on the federal level. There's a word that we're not going to write down, but you probably should know. It's the word jurisdiction. And different levels of government have different powers or different responsibilities depending on their jurisdiction. And sometimes they share powers. States can tax, so can the federal government. But when it comes to declaring war, that's just the federal government. When it comes to running elections, that's just the state. And those are things, some of those things are outlined in the Constitution. Some of those things are implied in the Constitution. And some of those things have been worked out over time. So you got compromise, you got federalism. Here's two more terms. And we're going to turn our paper a little bit so we can write this way. It's just easier to write this way. It's a concept called checks and balances. And to be honest with you, that's almost a whole nother video. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. But we use these checks to keep any one group from getting too much power. So when I say different groups, I mean we have different parts of our government, which kind of ties into the next concept. And those different parts of our government each have different things that they get to do. But to keep them from stepping out of their bounds, we have checks to maintain that balance. And we can talk about that at a later date. But just to give you an example, like the president's ability to veto laws. He can stop a law and he can veto that law and keep it from becoming real if he doesn't like it enough. And that's been used a lot over time. Okay, here's the last term I want to put up here right now. It's separation of powers. And this is really what most of this document today we're going to build is based upon. And as we get going, you'll have better understanding of why that is. But keep in mind, separation of powers is really just the idea that everybody has their own job. Kind of like a football team, the quarterback has their job, receiver has their job, the linemen have their job, linebackers have their job. When you start doing somebody else's job, you got problems. Say the same thing about soccer, same thing about every sport pretty much. Baseball's a good one. First base, if first base tries to play third base, what happens with first base? Okay, it doesn't work out very good. So here you go. This is our initial. Now we're going to keep on going with the vocab words here. We're going to get them all down, then we're going to make sense of them, okay? So we got these here. We got this here. Follow along. Try to keep them spaced correctly. Go right up here, right in the middle of the page, right in this point. We're going to add a word. It's called legislative. In legislative, when you think about legislative, you should be thinking about, well, you've got legislators that run for election all the time, and they do these on the local level. They actually do these on the state level and the federal level. So a legislative body at the local level might be your school board or your city council. On a state level, it would be somebody like your state representative, your local guy, maybe somebody who actually lives in your neighborhood, but they go to your state house, they go to your capital, and they pass laws. And then you've got a federal government. And this is really tied to the federal government, but most states are very similar to how the federal government looks in terms of what these positions do. So we talked about the legislative branch. Once you start thinking about on the national level, I'm really talking about what we call as a Congress. People are called congressmen, congresswoman, Congress. And in the Congress, they have a specific job. Their job is to make laws. So when you think of a legislature, think of a lawmaker. That's a great way to describe them. They're just lawmakers. And our Congress is unique from a lot of places in the world, but it's been copied a lot because it really is pretty effective. We have something called a bicameral legislature. And if you don't know what bicameral is, you might tap into your old history knowledge and remember what the Great Compromise was, going down to this term, and how they were trying to figure out how they can represent small states and big states. And they came up with an idea of having two houses, two different groups. Bi means two, and cameral refers to houses. And we talk about those two different houses. We're going to go right up here up top. So let's scroll up here. And right in the center of this top box, right along that line, I want you to write this term. The Senate. And the Senate is one of those houses that were just referred to. And along with the sentence, we have something called the House of Representatives. And I'm going to draw that a little bit of angle because I'm going to lose my spacing over here. You see how helpful these little boxes are? They really help us keep things organized better, because sometimes we have some real issues with spatial reasoning. And I don't care how old you get and how good of an artist you are, making use of your paper is a challenge. So if we can make good use of our paper and make our notes spread them out in a way that we could do something a little bit more effective for our learning, we're going to be a lot better off. So that's why we folded our paper to start off with. So these are your two houses that make up your legislature. And we're going to come back to this and talk about it in a few minutes, but we're going to keep moving because we got other terms we got to get on here. So the next term we're going to put over here is something completely different. We're going to get away from legislature. We're going to talk about something new. Right here in the center, we're going to write the word executive. An executive is something that's important to know because this makes up 1/3 of our government. And I'm really talking about the executive branch. And you may not know what the executive branch is, but once I say it, you will, because everybody knows who this guy is. And someday there'll be a woman, but not yet. We do have a vice president who's a woman. That's been accomplished. And that person is just one heartbeat away from being the president. And when you think of president, I want you to think of somebody who is part of the executive branch, but specifically the executive branch is designed to enforce laws. Do you see how that's different than what the legislative branch is doing? They're enforcing laws that somebody else is making. So if you were to look on the local level, that'd be like a town mayor would be the chief executive of your community. In a state, that would be your governor. But in the federal level, we're talking about the president of the United States. And when you think about the president, the most primary job, the most important thing they have is defense of our nation. Now that some people might argue that a little bit, but I don't really think it's much of an argument, to be honest with you. And so we're going to label this role as a commander-in-chief. Now, this is an important idea to talk about early on because we start talking about checks and balances and separation of power. The president is the only commander-in-chief. I don't care what other branch of government you're in, the most highest ranking person for the U.S. military to answer to is going to be the president. That's who they answer to. But the president just can't go out and declare war on whoever he wants. He's got checks to keep him in place. So Congress over here has to declare war, and then the president gets to go and use the army to manage that war. So in a way, they're enforcing their will, if that makes sense. Okay, so we're going to keep moving. And right along this line, follow along executive, we're going to write another term. It's judicial. And judicial refers to the branch of government that we have that actually judges laws. And there's some important terms that we should probably bring up. This is the term constitutional versus unconstitutional. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Remember, they judge laws. So, think of this scenario. The Congress passed a law. The president approves the law. And once it gets out in the open, somebody challenges the law. They don't like it. Then it works its way to the judicial system. And eventually we have something called a U.S. Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land. They will listen to the arguments about that law, and then they will decide whether that law is constitutional or unconstitutional. And if it's constitutional, that means it follows or works in accordance to our U.S. Constitution. If it's unconstitutional, that means it can't be a law because it contradicts or goes against what our Supreme Court interprets as being constitutional or part of the supreme law of the land. So we got all these things written down, and we're going to add more details in a few minutes, but we're going to start with this right now. We're going to make the connections between all these items, okay? So follow along. This is going to get really tricky, but you're going to be really excited because you're going to be a beautiful artist when you're done. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start right over here, and we're going to bring this all the way here. And then I'm going to do one of these things. You kind of getting the idea what we're drawing here? Just connecting the lines. Now this is where we get a little tricky here. We're going to go this way. Then we're going to make a Y in here because there are two houses within this branch. And now we have the three branches of government. 1, 2, 3. And our Constitution is actually broken into 7 different articles. Those articles are like little mini chapters. They each define a different thing. The legislative branch is discussed and defined in Article 1 of the Constitution. The executive branch is in Article 2. And the judicial branch, that's defined in Article number 3. Those are all the articles that basically create our government. Now, the other articles are important. They cover different things. They talk about states' rights, and they talk about an amendment process and things like that. But the first 3 are ones that probably affect you the most on a day-to-day basis in terms of how our government looks. And when people are running for office, they're running for these different jobs. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit here too, okay? Now, when we start talking about individual positions, each of these different positions have different expectations and different qualifications. So, for instance, if you're going to become a U.S. Senator, you actually have to be 30 years old to be a U.S. Senator because they want somebody with a little more experience, a little more knowledge, because a lot of what the Senate does is deals with like foreign affairs. And they also want you to be a little more grounded with your country. So you have to be a citizen for 9 years before you can become a U.S. senator. And because they want you a little more grounded, when you actually do run for this job, you're going to have it for 6 years before you have to run for re-election. But in saying that, you can run as many times as you want, and you never ever have to worry about having a limit on the number of times you can run. Now, the House is a little bit different. You can be younger. 25 years old, that's all you got to be. And you only have to be a citizen for 7 years. But if you want to run for the House of Representatives, you better plan on getting your job done and getting it done quick, because you have 2-year terms before you have to run again and answer for whatever you did. And part of the reason is because when we talk about taxation, we talk about money bills and spending bills, those all generate in the House of Representatives. They wanted to make sure that whoever's doing that would have to answer for it very, very quickly in terms of having to run again for re-election and explaining to people why they're spending and taxing that money. So it's all by design. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a little color here, because you know what? These are leaves. Let's make them beautiful. Okay, perfect. Now let's go on to the president. President's a whole different breed of cat. The president actually needs to be a little bit older. We really want this guy to be mature. So to be a president, you have to be 35 years old. Now, the youngest president to ever become president, I believe, was Teddy Roosevelt, because he was vice president and the president, William McKinley, got shot. When he got shot, Roosevelt took over. But the youngest to get elected, I believe, was JFK. Now, if you find some research that tells me different, I'm not going to fight you on it. But my memory's pretty good about this stuff. And if I remember right, that's exactly how it happened. So the president's 35 years old. And when they run for office, they have a 4-year term. Kind of split the difference between these two. But we have a process where we've limited the amount of time a president can be in office. They can only serve 2 terms, and then they're done. Now, it used to be unlimited, but a guy named Franklin D. Roosevelt ran for president, and he ran 4 times and got elected. And at that point, they said, yeah, that's a lot. So they changed the law with something called an amendment, and that amendment restricts the president to just 2 terms. Okay? And there's one more thing we're going to mention with the president here. The president has to be born a U.S. citizen. And the reason why they were really adamant about this is because they wanted to make sure that our president would not be influenced by outside forces. They wanted to make sure his primary focus was being president of the United States and not looking out for some other country. So all these things are designed really to make sure that our president's going to serve us the best. Now, we're going to go over, because we're almost out of time, Supreme Court. We're going to make this really easy, okay? Supreme Court justices serve for life. Now, I don't have time, and we don't have a setup here to really get into how they become Supreme Court justices. That's for a whole new video. But understand, once they get the job, they're there until they retire or until they die, which happens. And their primary role is just to review cases that are challenging the laws that have been processed over here. And because of that, they have a lot of power. They're the check to keep these guys consistent with that Constitution. Okay, a lot of stuff here, and I'm even going to write down here 3 branches of government. That way you know exactly what this is all about. Okay? So, I guess we can kind of doctor this up a little bit here. Don't have a ton of time, but we'll do it this way. And that way, you know exactly what you're looking at when you look at your paper. Now, if you want to color in your map, go ahead. You want to color in this right here, go ahead. I don't have time for it right now, but you definitely have all the time in the world because you are now a master of doodle notes. Okay, thank you very much. If you have questions, watch out for other videos. We might be able to answer them through those. And if we can't, there's always something called the internet. Don't be afraid to use it. Goodbye.